Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 4 of the King's Game Podcast. I'm your host, King Narakami. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 4 today. It's a bit of a double-header episode this week. I posted one last night, and tonight I have a very special episode about the PlayStation Vita. Before we get started, let me just say that Sony announced very recently that the Vita Store is coming to a close on August 27th, 2021. So during this stream, we're going to celebrate the life of the Vita and go over some of our fondest memories of it. And who better to have on this episode of the podcast other than the Vita master himself, Spencer from SMT Network. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, and I don't know why I reminded myself of this, but there is a very specific Vita channel on YouTube I found many years ago, and I loved their name so unironically. Their name was the Vita Boys, and your voice sounds just like the main dude who does the videos, and I don't know why I never noticed that.
Is it the southern accent?
It is. It's like a southern accent thing, and I don't know why. For whatever reason, when I learned about their channel, one of the things I thought was so funny, they're not really active anymore. They did that weird thing of when a lot of Vita content creators out there, when the Switch came out, they were like, okay, well, the Vita's going to die, so let's just kind of move over to this. And then their views just totally plummeted because, say what you will, if you were someone who went from the Vita to Switch and went hardcore for it, the people who want to look at that coverage, it's not always the same. So it was one of those funny things of people kind of transitioning and then was losing all the interest or the passion kind of behind it. Before that, though, I was going to do this as my intro. This is the closest to ASMR I will ever get. But you really love the PlayStation Vita when this sound is a verbal turn on. Just listen to this.
Oh my god!
And you just get that little you tear open the Vita. Get that little sticker peeling off sound from the touchscreen.
Put that thing back in your pants, Spencer.
Oh, sorry.
Oh boy, this is going to be a fun episode, isn't it?
Well, I'm also glad you decided just to do this with me. I mean, if you had had Kuro or David on, I would have just had to verbally shame them the whole time. They're not really PlayStation Vita fans when they're out there on Twitter saying oh, I haven't turned it on in 19 years. It won't let me connect online. That's not a technical problem, David. That just means Sony knows you don't care enough about the Vita. It's turned off your access.
Right. It knows you're a fake fan, so it's over for you. But
if you're not buying games on the weekly for the system, it's just going to auto shut you off. It says, listen, you weren't going to buy it for me before, you're not going to buy anything for me now.
Well, speaking of games releasing or getting games weekly, I didn't really have this on my outline, but I guess this is a good time to mention it. The store's closing soon, and apparently some developers were not made aware of that, from what I hear. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, so the Vita development scene is not that large. You can really list all the people actively making Vita games on less than two hands. And it's Lilymo Games. I know they canceled a game for them. They had done Hebroxia and Twin Breaker. Sometimes Ratalaika has been kind of working on stuff, but pretty much they finished up all their stuff when physical games ended. Who's another one? I forget the developer's name, but a guy who did Russian Subway Dogs was really surprised. Oh my god, I'm gonna forget. But basically, there are all these people out there Top Hat Studios, all these devs out there who are actively working on Vita ports, finding out at the same time as everybody else. It really, really stung when that news dropped because we had been asking the devs the week before when it was just a rumor, hey, is the store closing? And they were like, oh, no way. There was a whole thing out there of literally in March, Sony sold Colin Moriarty a Vita dev kit.
Oh.
In March.
Oh.
So it's that this wasn't a last minute thing. They just weren't telling anybody. And my real kind of question I'm wondering now that it's all been official and stuff is because this all broke through the Gamer, the website, not just the term.
Right.
And I'm wondering, who had the inside scoop at the Gamer? Because, I know almost everybody still making games for this system, and I had no idea that this was coming. Obviously, if you are even remotely aware of the PlayStation Vita, its store closing isn't that big of a surprise to you. It's just how kind of out of nowhere it all felt is what really, really sucked for it. So
I was going to ask you, actually, do you feel like it wasn't an oversight or anything by Sony? They just decided just to go ahead and do it, you think?
The overgrowing Sony accountants kind of looked at the books and said, we have all of these thousands of developers and publishers on PS3, PSP, and Vita that we maybe give like a penny or $1 to every month. Like, think about all these like games like on like these PlayStation 3 or Vita like digital only titles. Like, unless you're something like a Stardew Valley or whatnot, or a Minecraft, you're not getting like weekly sales most likely. So this is their effort of closing those accounts down, and hence why like you're still able to re-download stuff forever. You're just not going to be allowed to re-buy anything.
Right. I wonder if the re-download, it'll probably eventually stop as well, which gets me thinking, the future of gaming is kind of like up in the air with this. Like, I know people want to go all digital. That's why it's so important for me to preserve my discs and everything and collect, instead of, just am worried about, am I going to get to play this again one day? Am I going to be able to re-download, even Persona 3 FES that I have for my PS3, am I going to be able to re-download that forever? Or when's it finally going to stop? What if my hard drive gives out? How long do you think we'll be able to re-download this stuff for? Do you think one day it'll eventually just completely go away? Are you worried about an all-digital future?
I mean, just because I'm always very anti-digital in the sense of I want to give the developers as much support as I can, while at the same time knowing a digital purchase is just no ways of looking at it is going to be inferior. Like, unless it's something like, let's say, like you're getting something for free through like PlayStation Plus, or there's like a really good digital deal. Like, obviously those, you're buying the convenience of playing it digitally there, but those things can be taken away a lot easier than, say, having a cartridge or a disc of whatever game you're looking for. So I actually think that Sony has nothing really stopping them from keeping those download servers just up in perpetuity. Like, it's just something on the back end of, it's not something that really gets that heavily used. I'm sure it's going to get a ton of use like over the next like year or so with the store closing, but I think there's specifically a reason why they are closing down the store and not closing down like re-downloading everything like how Nintendo did with the Wii. And then, like, everyone, I was talking about this recently of like, while it really sucked how Nintendo closed down the Wii's Virtual Console and whatnot, there was a reason. Like, no one was surprised really when it happened. We were mad or we were disappointed, but like when you saw that Nintendo wasn't even allowing you to re-download your own purchases on the Wii, it was just one of those things that Nintendo's already just been like, it's had such a bad history of using digital storefronts or even like account systems and stuff that you didn't really expect it. Whereas even with Sony in the PS3 side of things and PSP and Vita, at the very least, like, you gotta at least let people download those stuffs. Otherwise, it's like, why are we now panic buying stuff in mass? Like, I think if people were legitimately worried the downloads would be stopped in the relatively near future, Sony would have just said, hey, don't buy anything else. Like, you can't add funds to your wallet anymore. Because, like, at that point, it's like, I'm sure Sony's going to see a huge uptick in digital sales over the next, like, 6 months leading up to the store closure. But also at the same time, it's like, they're like, however pissed off people were when they announced the store's closing, people will be infinitely more mad if that download list option's ever taken away.
Oh, definitely. I don't know about you, but I went through my PS3 the other day and got a bunch of SMT ports and DLC for Persona 4 Arena that I might have missed back in the day, because, while we can re-download everything, as I'm sure everyone knows, you cannot purchase or add anything to your wallet for the PS3 or the Vita or PSP systems as of August 27, 2021. So I'm glad we kind of went ahead and got that segment out of the way, because I didn't really have it in my outline, but thanks for bringing that up for me, Spencer. So,
see, you got my hopes up, because this had initially started with us talking about weekly new games, and I thought this was funny. Just going to show the state of the system. Did you know that literally today, 2 brand new PlayStation Vita physical games got announced for going on sale this week?
I know that PlayAsia has a lot of these new, they're still releasing new physical Vita games. I just didn't know that they were getting released in droves like this soon. So my question to you is, are people still going to, the developers you have talked to and that are producing these games, do you expect them to still release physical games for the Vita? Do you think they'll stop production completely? What do you think?
So with the Vita, bad news. Production ended in February. So it was never as public as it was in the West, where it was February 2019 is when those games couldn't be printed anymore physically. In Asia, Sony wanted to be a lot more hush hush about it. So obviously, if you knew developers, if you knew the language of how publishers were talking and timelines, basically, if you couldn't get your game done by January 2021 for submission, it wasn't done for a PlayStation Vita physical because cutoff had to happen and printing all the games had to be submitted to Sony in Asia by February. So every game now that is ever going to exist physically on the Vita has been printed. And the only other publisher that's really held off is there's three publishers. There is Limited Run Games currently has two.
Mm-hmm.
They have Super Meat Boy, which is its own really, really dumb story we can get into. That's already printed and has been ready for over 2 years now. I have a copy myself, but that's just because I'm a madman. And if you bought every single, all 101 Limited Run Vita games, you get a full set bonus game for free, which is Revenge of the Bird King. So those have around 2,000 or so copies produced because 2,000 was the limit was the lowest you could print without paying a penalty fee in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And then the only other one outside of Asia that's still left is Nicalis. So Nicalis is the developer. They're more of a publisher, really, who've done stuff like VVVVV and 1001 Spikes. So those two games were printed by Nicalis. Also late 2018, early 2019. The problem is with them is they just won't talk to fans about it. They've literally the backlash behind a lot of other weird things. Nicalis just half of their tweets they don't even have replies on because they know fans are just going to ask why won't you give us our Vita games already. So they're just holding out because they literally want to just be the last Vita game, which is such a dick measuring contest that never leads to people being happy with you. It's really, really frustrating, and people are so sick of it because it's we know the games exist. We've seen them out in the wild because copies have gotten out there through Sony employees having copies and whatnot. And the weird thing about it is just yeah, obviously, even me, who's been really vocal about complaining about Nicalis, I'm still gonna buy it just because I want those games. 1001 Spikes is really, really fun, and VVVVVV is really great. But it's just going to be a giant fuck you of once it's literally I'm so ready of once I have these games for them, it'd be okay, I can a good example is to a lesser aggro extent Limited Run Games. I have had every tweet sent to me as a notification for 2 years, mm-hmm. just so I can keep up to date with their Vita thing whenever it does finally happen. But at the same time, it's just man, I'm so ready to not really have to get my head in the game, which is kind of leading us into the final physical publisher, which is so nice. PlayAsia is the distributor of them all, but the company who made all the physical games themselves was East Asia Soft. So East Asia Soft is a developer and publisher of a lot of indie games in Asian regions. So both companies are based in Hong Kong, and basically what the point is now, all of their games are printed. I think from what I've heard, there's anywhere from it's 12 to 20 games are left. We know that they have enough games to last the rest of 2021 at 2 games a month. So it is April as of this recording, and on April 8th, they are releasing Bombs and Dungeons and 88 Heroes. So they're still doing games. Obviously, their size, and most of them are going to be indies. They've said they still have a couple big heavy hitter stuff left, but I just think it's so cool of that anything is still coming physically for the system. So even in situations like this where it's a $5 digital only game, yeah, Dungeons and Bombs and 88 Heroes, Dungeons and Bombs has 1,000 units and 88 Heroes has 1,800 units. So these are still really, really small print runs, but it's just one of those things of we're so close to the end, and I've enjoyed almost every single East Asia Soft one they've done. Same with Limited Run of these are such weird, interesting, unique games having physically that it's I'm so close to the end. I gotta just buy it. At this point, even if there was one that was insulting to my intelligence, I would still suck it up and buy it because it's they are so few and far between, and it's so close to the end. It's like I might as well just support these developers because, like, think about it. Going back to what we said before of developers like finding out about this as they were making Vita games, it's like these devs weren't making Vita games to make money. If they were like, if you have made a PlayStation Vita game and it was digital only, you have guaranteed lost money on it in the last 2 years.
Right.
Just because there is not enough people there to pay for the cost of development, porting, testing, optimizing, and even just rating for the system. Like, just getting your game rated for the PlayStation Store costs hundreds of dollars.
Mm-hmm. That's insane. But the thing about the Vita is, the base might not be huge right now, but ladies and gentlemen, the reason I got Spencer was because, as you can see, the fan base, while small, is very, very active still and passionate about the system.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, a small, like, I think small is always, like, a kind of a tough one of, like, I would say pretty confidently, if you could, like, look at a straw poll of active participants of, like, okay, do you own a PlayStation Vita? How much do you play it? And then, like, how much do you own and play your 3DS? I know that there are way more 3DSs out there in the world. When is the last time you've ever heard anyone talking about 3DS games? Like, the 3DS audience is, like, there for nostalgia, but, like, we kind of talked about earlier with, like, people kind of moving from the Switch to from the Vita to the Switch, that transition was a lot more natural. Like, a lot of people, like, primarily all 3DS owners, when the Switch was out, you dropped your 3DS unless there was something really special that came out, and not a lot of games came out.
Except a little game called Persona Q2, which was technically the final game for the 3DS. Am I correct?
You are so wrong. It actually hurts because I'm just going to prove how big of a fucking nerd I am by telling you how wrong. Okay, so in 2019, Persona Q2 was the final retail release.
Right.
That is including Japan and in the West as well. Then in 2020, Limited Run Games released the Atui Collection. So the Atui Collection is basically Mutant Muds, Super Deluxe something. It's like a big indie compilation from a really, really awesome developer. His name is Jules. Awesome stuff. I don't think it's like that crazy expensive because like minimum print run for 3DS is like 5,000. It's like really big in the West. So they printed that last year, and it was a really slow seller. Like, if you sell something as the last 3DS game, you're gonna get some people's attention, but like it's definitely not enough to like kind of make people turn their heads. It's interesting that you said that because I was thinking, okay, now it's going to be the last. Like, now a Atui Collection was going to be the last one after Persona Q2. But, like, literally a week ago, I think their name is Pixel Heart Games. Yes, okay. Pixel Heart Games just tweeted out randomly, hey guys, so we're just going to start doing 3DS games. And they were just like, hey, we're going to just still make these. Because Nintendo never closed it down in the West or anywhere else. So in Europe, Pixel Heart is doing a... here we go. They have a 3DS section here. They are doing a print run of Andro Duos and Andro Duos 2. And it is... Oh, yeah, they're doing it. I was going to say, I thought it was just European, but no, they've even announced they're doing a US and a European version. And the reason that's interesting about 3DS is, unlike the Vita, the 3DS is region-locked. Mm-hmm. So, depending on the region, like, since the Atui Collection was only done by Limited Run Games, if you didn't have an American 3DS, you couldn't play it. So... that I already thought was crazy, that a small publisher like Pixel Heart was doing this. And then going back to Nicalis on April Fool's Day, because of course announce games that are never going to happen. Nicalis on Twitter, I have to go back just for the verbiage, because like I mentioned, they are just such a check out our biggest dick competition with wanting to be the last release of everything.
Right.
They tweeted out an image of The Binding of Isaac on 3DS. Because if you remember, The Binding of Isaac came out on 3DS as a new 3DS exclusive downloadable title. And then they said, would today be a good day to announce the last physical new 3DS game?
Oh, come on, man. They're at it again.
Yeah, so it's like, you know what you're doing. Like, I totally believe that they would have had that printed because like Isaac is their cash cow. Like if like people think Persona is Atlus's cash cow, the Binding of Isaac is Nicalus's cash cow 1000%. So the 3DS is still alive a little bit, but like literally I listed 2 games are like still coming. I'm sure there will possibly be more depending on how the Pixel Heart stuff goes because that's an open pre-order. But I mean, I think it's funny that the 3DS is still able to print because, like, people don't even know this, but you can still print Wii games.
Oh yeah. I think
like
there was a Just Dance that released last year for the Wii for physical retail release.
Last year was the first year without a Wii version. So 2020 was the first year because they always do like in 2019 they did 2020.
Right.
So in 2019 that was the last Just Dance on Wii, but last year's Shakedown Hawaii and Retro City Rampage came out on the Wii and the Wii U.
Why do I remember that? I vaguely
it was
remember
a big
that.
deal because at the time that was one of those ones. If it had been so long since a Wii U game or a Wii game came out, that people really, really cared about it. But I going back to the Vita, though, I think it's just there is such a difference even between Wii collecting, Wii U, and 3DS of like the people who are asking for physical games on Vita isn't because we just want it to be done. Like what are these games going to be? It's because like we want to play them. Like having these games on our shelves are cool. Like everything about physical releases for the Vita was so unique. Of like. The cases are really unique. They're really tiny, super bright blue boxes. You open them up, and in 99% of people's cases, it's like an empty case, no reversible art, and a slot with no manual and a super tiny card. But then it makes those releases that come with stuff even more special. Like one of the things I really like about East Asia Soft games is and actually you got Root Double as well. Like from me, like it's so nice of like for the most part their games are like $35 a pop. You get, at minimum, a game, a soundtrack, a little certificate, and it's all in this really nice, thick-feeling box. Like, it doesn't feel cheap.
Right. And the thing about the Root Double release, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I was about to mention that as well, it's actually getting a Switch release for $50, and it doesn't come with anything extra. The one for Vita release came with, I think it comes with an art book, I think a CD, and a certificate. And the full game.
No art book, but yeah, it comes with a nice beefy manual, and yeah, even just like the little like manual alone would be nice because yeah, that retail Switch release you're talking about, exact same price, it's just the Switch version. So it's really really funny of like kind of comparing the state of collecting state for both. And if you are interested in visual novels, Root Double is still in stock for some reason. I don't know why 2,000 copies was really hard for that to push, but it's one of those things though, like I think people have, even in the collecting scene, when a price is like higher than normal, people get really weirded out. Like you probably don't remember this because this was the first year of the Vita's life, but when the PlayStation Vita launched, it had 2 interesting things about price about it. It launched with digital games were always cheaper, even if it was just by like $10 to $3. And it was the first handheld system to break the $40 maximum price. So what was funny about this is like games like Uncharted Golden Abyss were $50 at launch, which to be fair, like games like that were awesome, but it was just one of those crazy things of like, oh my god, like this is really expensive. Like Attack on Titan on the Vita, even digitally, was $50 only. Like there were some rhythm games that were $50 only, but then there was also that little trend of, but let's make the physical one cheaper. So at the same time, going back and looking at Uncharted, I think was like $45 for the digital version. So Sony got like kind of interesting with the pricing there, but obviously after the first year, it kind of just evened out, and people were like, okay, well, just make everything the same price because you're either going to piss off retailers or confuse customers.
Right. Which is a really weird practice. I vaguely remember them doing that and hearing about that, but speaking of the launch of the Vita, let's go ahead and get into that right now, if you don't mind. We are 25 minutes into this, and we are just starting on my outline. This is why
No pressure.
I swear, this man's head is like an encyclopedia for Vita knowledge, and you never know what you're going to get when he starts talking. So, the topics today include the history of the Vita, ATLUS published games for the Vita, and our favorite Vita memories. So, let's get right into it. Of course, the Vita is the successor of the PlayStation Portable system that did fairly well. in the West. Of course, it didn't beat out DSLs or anything, but Sony tried their hand at another handheld system. They first announced the Vita on January 27th, 2011 at a PlayStation meeting press conference in Japan. It was reported that the device was aiming for PS3 quality visuals. What do you think about that statement right there, Spencer?
I mean, at the time, what was funny is if you look at the hardware behind it, one of the crazy things people don't talk about a lot is you probably remember Mark Cerny from the PlayStation 4 era, right?
Of course.
So Mark Cerny was actually the architectural lead behind the Vita as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what was really funny about that is tech-wise, the Vita was actually more powerful than the PS3 in some aspects, which is why they came out with those stats. The place where it ended up kind of getting itself bit in the ass a little bit was the lack of GPU power that really kind of bit it in the butt, even now with some games. Like, pretty much anytime you see the Unity logo on the Vita, just expect it to just run really, really bad. And it was just one of those funny things of, like, there are so many cases of games, like, looking on the Vita, whether it be stuff like Uncharted, Killzone, or even, like, more, like, kind of animated titles, like Catherine Full Body, like, looks amazing on the system. It's one of those funny cases of, like, the system's hardware is really, really impressive if you know what to do with it. It's just one of those cases of not all developers really kind of knew how to, like, act with it. Now, the other thing I wanted to look up, if you had mentioned here, okay, fun fact, because I know no one actually really cares about this. Do you remember what the code name was for the Vita before it had a name?
Oh, man. Gosh. I watched a documentary recently on this, and it just slipped my mind. What is it?
So it was announced initially, the successor I think was announced in 2010 as the NGP, the Next Generation Portable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was really funny. Like, I remember I was listening to a podcast at the time, and they were talking about getting hands-on with the NGP. And I was, like, in high school at the time of the announcement. I was thinking, man, this is, like, going to be such a futuristic handheld. Like, in my brain, it either felt like a million years away or something I was never going to get my hands on. Because I never really had that much disposable income growing up unless I traded something. So the only time I'd ever really bought a system was a PS3, like 2 years even after at that point. Like, if it wasn't for Metal Gear Solid 4, I probably would have gone many years without even having a PS3 until it got a lot cheaper. But yeah, it was just so funny, like, going into the Vita, how much hype it had behind it, because basically, and people forget this a lot, the 3DS, even before its release, was kind of a laughingstock. It was too much money. Like, 3DS launched at $279, which is amazing when you realize, like, how bad those initial launch models were. It had no launch lineup at all. Like, the launch lineup of the 3DS was Steel Diver, Nintendogs, and Super Street Fighter 4 3D Edition. Like, it was really bad. And then you look at the Vita launch lineup, and the Vita launch lineup is, like, it's like one of the best launch lineups I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah. And we'll get to that here in a second. That's actually on my list, if you don't mind holding off on those launch titles. Mm-hmm. I was going to have you see if you remember any of those titles. I'm sure you do. But, yeah, so obviously it didn't have quote-unquote PS3 graphics. But I think the system was way ahead of its time. Would you say the same thing?
See, I think it's like it's easy to say it like boasted or said it did too much, but I think it's because there's not a lot of games that you could really compare in ways that could, like, I legitimately think that the Vita is like PS3 level, if not better sometimes, because I look at games that are like, let's look at like games that are equal of MLB 12. When you were looking at MLB 12 on PS3 or Vita, that was like the same game. Like, they looked really, really great. Looking ahead at other titles like Dragon's Crown. Dragon's Crown ran better on Vita than it did on PS3, and that's a very, very intensive Vanillaware game. It's just like so many cases of games. Not like if for every game that I could say, like, oh, here's a really great one. PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. Say what you will about the game. That Vita version is amazing. It was made by Blue Point, and they absolutely fucking knocked it out of the park for that game. But the problem was, it all kind of goes back to what I said, of the architecture behind it. You had to make so many concessions and kind of give and take in so many ways that for developers, if you're not like really up to it, like, for as many developers out there as there were for the Vita, there were not a ton who knew how to really make its bells and whistles kind of sing without either overclocking it or making concessions and other stuff like that.
Right. I think that you said like it's kind of PS3 quality. I mean, that's kind of true when you have games like Killzone and Uncharted that came out for the system, games that pushed the PS3 back in the day as well, and you get to play those on a handheld basis. So the Vita was a really underrated system. And let's see here. Let's go ahead and jump to the Vita launch right quick. It launched on December 17th, 2011 in Japan, February 22nd, 2012 in America. Let's see. The features at launch: 5-inch, 540p OLED screen, which I think we can both agree that OLED screen is like the best thing about the Vita. I absolutely love my OLED screens. Rear touchpad, physical buttons, dual analog sticks. Just a beaut of a design. What did you think about it? What do you think about that original 1000 model?
I mean, it's right next to me here. Even after all of these years of it's still such a stunner, and the fact that I don't feel like it's outdated even almost a decade after its release, and I think that's just such a kind of call out to its technical chops of not only what was on the inside but the outside of it looks sleek, the screen is nice. Having an OLED screen in 2011 was insane, and even having one now, it's the only portable OLED screen I ever see out and about is on new iPhones and stuff.
And it really gets me excited because, that new Switch that we're going to be getting is also going to have an OLED screen too. So that gets me excited. And to me, if you looked at the Vita screen, you wouldn't be able to tell that it wasn't in 720p. It looks, all the colors are so vibrant and everything on the screen. It almost looks HD to me.
Yeah, it's funny really how much they get skidded by for having such a low resolution. It is a 540p screen, which is barely over the minimum requirement to be classified as HD, which is what I thought was always so funny. Of you would get these games whether it be Metal Gear Solid HD, Jak and Daxter, or God and War HD collection, of just they're technically HD, but they're barely running better than the PS2 versions. But it was just so funny of I mean, hey, it's HD. I guess you can call it whatever you want.
Honestly, you can't really tell on such a smaller screen. The visuals look stunning, especially a game like Persona 4 Golden that's really colorful. It looks absolutely amazing. If you don't have the 1000 model of the Vita, go check that out. If you were to ever buy a Vita, get the 1000 model for sure.
Unless it was one of the multiple special edition versions that came out for either 1000 or 2000.
I have
because there are so many models.
I have the Assassin's Creed one that was completely white.
Yep, that was the only glacier white model we ever got in the West for the 1000. That one is really, really nice. The only way I could ever see myself upgrading from my 1000 is there is a red 1000 model that came out around the time of Soul Sacrifice at release, and I'm just a huge fan of the color reds, but that white one was the first time of I had always gone for black, but for whatever reason something about that white Vita really called out to me, and still to this day it's got some scuffs and marks on it for it, but my screen totally flawless. I don't really have any smudges. I've got some light cosmetic stuff through a decade of daily use, because I bring my Vita with me everywhere I go. When I'm at work, my Vita is
I'm not surprised whatsoever.
So it's just one of those great things of even a system that is as much of a dirt sponge as the all white touchscreen Vita with 2 analog sticks. I was just looking at it today. I'm man, I'm so lucky that this thing is still in as good condition as it is, and it has not broken on me at all.
It's absolutely beautiful, like we said before. And there's been other variations of the Vita, but to me, that Glacier White Vita looks amazing beside of my PlayStation 4 Glacier White, my PlayStation 4 Pro, and my PS5 now. So it's just all in one color scheme, and I absolutely love it. Another thing about the Vita that was interesting was that it ditched the UMD format for its games, because that's what PSP had. It was a little mini disc that you put in your PSP, and the game would run for that. And they switched the game cartridge of either 2 or 4 gigabytes in size. Do you think that was a good move by Sony? Did you prefer these cartridges, or do you prefer the UMD discs?
So 1000%, I think the carts are better. So for so many reasons, the carts were
Right.
more expensive to make, obviously, but to break a PlayStation Vita cart is a lot harder to do than breaking a UMD disc. Obviously, you could probably lose a lot easier, but the carts made loading a lot faster. It meant they could run the games off the carts. There was no need to install the games and you put them in there. And it was just one of those things of that was a good lesson Sony actually learned from the Nintendo consoles of like this is Sony's first real foray into cartridge technology. And I mean it works great. Like those carts hold like for certain games there were limitations of like because there were only 2 gig models and 4 gig models. And what's really funny is there was an era of like I think it was like 2016 or 2017. It was 2017 was when SD Gundam G Generation Genesis came out, and I'll never forget this. It was the first dual cartridge game because it was 6 gigs.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the most they could shrink this down, which is extra funny when you look at it because it is a 2D strategy role playing game with like chibi Gundams, and it's just one of those things of like it's just such a massive game. Like that's the smallest they could crunch it down to. So the way that it works actually was. And I thought this was such a cool workaround that I hoped other games would do this, but it never happened because I could only imagine how expensive it is to make a single cartridge game, let alone a game that requires 2. So the first disc is a 4 gigabyte cart that you install into the system. And then once it's done, it's actually like if you've ever used a 2-disc PS4 game.
Right,
it's
right.
The exact same way.
That's how I
There's
pictured
an installed,
it.
There's an install cart and then there's a play cart, and it was just such a unique thing. And like the best part about it was like both had manuals. Like it was like because it wasn't like a PlayStation Vita case with 2 slots in it. It was 2 separate PlayStation Vita cases that came together.
That's crazy, man. How many? Do you know of any other games that did that? Was that very? That was a. I'm sure that wasn't.
That
common.
was the only one. SD Gundam G Generation Genesis was the only game that ever did that. And if you are curious, that game is amazing and is actually still in stock. The last reprint of that happened earlier this year. That's actually still at Play Asia now. If you're curious.
If you don't mind me asking, right quick, by the way, how much did they charge for the game at release?
I bought that at MSRP. What would that have been? I still have that in my email.
I feel like if they sold it at 50, they would still be losing some because they have to include 2 cartridges.
I mean, at that point, like, because also you have to like realize like a lot of it. But hold on, SD Gundam. Thank God I have a horrible memory of this.
Well, I don't think you woke up expecting to reminisce about SG Gundam.
Oh man, I'm ready for it at a moment's notice. But yeah, no, I'm trying to like think about the specific though of the because the price of it now compared to what I bought it for, I feel like they're actually pretty similar. And then heavy arm, here we go.
It's just so fascinating to me that it's the only game to do that.
I bought this copy November 13th, 2016, and it was $59 at launch. So it was about $60 before shipping.
Okay, that makes sense.
And now you can buy it, the last print run of it from Play Asia for the low price of finding the Vita section on Play Asia's website. There you go. It is $50 right now.
Okay.
Both cartridges. It's the same version. It's a total steal. It is just one of like the craziest games out there. Like even like without like its content for it. So that was one like for a while it was actually really rare. Just because what's so crazy about it is not only is it a dual cartridge game, is that was in English. It was a English dual cartridge game that came out in Asia.
Right. Wow, that's really shocking. And I'm sure you have to have a big memory card for that as well to install the game on.
Which then brings us into probably the big elephant in the room of one of the reasons why the Vita was hard to sell at first.
Right. And I actually forgot to put this on my outline. I guess it accidentally got deleted, but I wanted to talk about that as well. The memory cards for the Vita themselves. Obviously, the PSP went for those memory sticks, I think it was. This is a little bit different where it's actually like, looks like a little micro USB, micro SD,
it's like
sorry.
Even smaller. It's like the size of like your pinky's fingernail. It is beyond tiny. It's crazy.
So do you think Sony made a mistake going with that? Because if you look at prices now, they are, a 64 gig is going to cost you, probably around $100 to get.
What's funny is that's the MSRP of those 64 gig cards has always been $100. But I think the problem wasn't that Sony went proprietary with the memory sticks. I think the problem was kind of twofold. One, there was no internal memory at all. On those 1000 models, there was no memory on the systems at all. And the other problem was, much like the PSP, people forget the micro SD card on the PSP was also proprietary. The difference with it, though, is that Sony let other publishers make micro SD cards. Micro, whatever the PSP ones are called. And the whole thing about the Vita was Sony never, and even to this day, has never given up like their patent on it. So the only way you could legally get a Vita memory card was through Sony, whereas at least with the PSP, they budged on it, and like you would see third party like Clear or like whatever like PSP memories, like memory stick duos, that's what it was called. Like I remember I bought my first legit one was like a gig from Sony, and way back when with the PSP, that was like $20 or something. And then like a year later, I found a 4 gig card at Best Buy for like 15. It was just like as soon as like you let other people, it's just like hard drives now. Like as soon as there's more competition, the prices will drop considerably. The thing with Vita memory cards is the prices were astronomical from the get-go. And they only ever got dropped once, and it was only for the 4, 8, and 16 gig model. Maybe also the 32. I'm gonna pull up those prices now, just because like I don't know if you remember, but those prices at the time were wild.
I'm searching eBay right now for a Vita.
No. This is what Sony sold them for.
Okay, gotcha.
So. Let me just take everyone on a nightmare trip right here. So if you would like to buy a PlayStation Vita memory card for 4 gigs, this is at launch. 4 gigs was $30, and you would fill that puppy up on like day one. 8 gigs was $45. We're already at game prices for 8 gigs. 16 gigs was $70, and 32 gigs at launch was $120.
That is
half of the price of the system.
That's ridiculous. I mean,
So when you're then saying, "Oh man, 64 gig cards are almost 100," it's like I remember when 64 gig cards got announced, I was like, "Oh, thank God," because like for me, the way I worked with the memory card is I didn't get a Vita until the Assassin's Creed bundle in October of 2012. But I had a memory card at launch because I was going at a Target one day, and this Target had a price error, and I got a 16 gig card for $20. For whatever reason, it was just like super screwed up at that store. And I had this Vita memory card for literally like half a year before I actually had the system. But like until then, like I remember I then got my 64 gig card because GameStop had imported a couple. And I worked there at the time in 2014, and with my discount, it was like $90 for a 64 gig card, which really isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things. But like for you, like well, I'm just curious, like now, what do you have in your Vita? And at the time, like what was the first one you got?
Unfortunately, the only one I have right now is a 8 gigabyte, and I bought a 4 one for my girlfriend because she doesn't play much. Right now, I'm looking at eBay, and I'm looking at some that have sold within the past few days. A 64 gigabyte memory card for your Vita sold at $153, which is
so thankfully, if you're willing to like compromise, you can get 16 and 32 gig cards for like under 50, which is nice. 64 is just, it's always been such a hot ticket like collector item because like you're getting it because if you like either have a huge digital library. What I love is this. My Vita, I have a 64 gig card in it. I have maybe 10 games digitally, and they're not big. I have maybe like 2 gigs of just downloadable games. My Vita has over 300 games installed, and that's what's most of my like my memory card. I think I have like 4 gigs left. Just think those little bubbles that when you put them in and they make like a little save slot or an update file, that's all it's in there. So like if you don't have like like if you're just an average Joe Schmo, like I guess like for you, like King, like what do you have, like 10, 20 like Vita games physically?
Physically, probably around 10. Yeah.
Yeah, like you'll never need more than a 16. Like what for like you'd have to really really go hard into the digital stuff to really want that all on there at the same time. And like the Vita just like most people when I show them my Vita, they're like, "Oh my god, is yours like hacked?" Cuz like like when you like hand someone like a jailbroken system and it just says like every game on there.
Right.
Mine is like that but legit, and it's just so funny of like I have everything like alphabetical by game name and everything for it. And it's like, oh, cool, are these all installed? I'm like, oh, no, this is just the save data and update file. Like, my hard drive is almost dead with just how many games I have.
Damn, dude. I know some of those update files are kind of ridiculous, too. I know when Danganronpa V3 came out, there was a patch for the game, for the Vita, so you can have high-quality audio, because they really had to compress it to fit it on the cartridge itself. Wasn't that like a gig download just for the audio itself, if I'm not mistaken?
So yeah, that was standalone DLC, and that's actually pretty common. Just because, assuming you're actually working with uncompressed audio files, like having a gig for a full-on game like that is not that crazy. One of my favorite examples of it, and it never gets talked about, is this: do you remember World of Final Fantasy?
Of course.
World of Final Fantasy, if you play it from the cartridge, has all of the music. There is no voice acting in any region you play it in. Mm-hmm. So the way that game is so beefy, on a 4 gig cart, they couldn't fit any voice acting. So it's just like you're listening to like someone like just muted all the character voices, but all the cutscenes still play out like normal. And same with gameplay. There's just no voices at all, English or Japanese. So you have to go to the store. Like, I guess, yeah, here's a good piece of advice with the store closing. If you ever plan on playing World of Final Fantasy, go to the PlayStation Store and download the English voices. Otherwise, that game will never have voice acting.
And that's one of the things that scares me about a digital future. It's like 13 Sentinels. Obviously, it came with a day one update with English voice acting. Because of COVID, they had time restrictions. So one day, you won't be able to update this game and have the English voice acting, probably. More than likely. Which goes back into our conversation earlier about an all-digital future. Kind of scares me a bit. So I wish there was a print of that game that would come with the English voice acting. I don't think that's going to happen. Unless they did it for the second reprint. I didn't know that they did a reprint of the game. That's what I learned today.
No, the version and all versions out there are still the same. Like ATLUS would have to resubmit it to Sony to include the patch, which God knows they'll never do.
Right. I'm even more shocked that we got a re-release.
I have been told that it's not a second print for 13 Sentinels. It's actually just copies that were made in the initial print run that just they ran out of art books, so now they're just selling the game.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I know. My cousin went into GameStop. My roommate, he went to GameStop the other day and bought the game, and it wasn't even. It didn't even have the wrapping around it, the shrink wrap, and they had actually taken it off and like taped together like the art book and stuff together, which shocked me. I'm like, are they running out of these art book copies? It gets me worried. I don't know if it'll be worth something one day. I'm keeping mine sealed for the time being, but
I feel like you're gonna have to wait a pretty long while for 13 Sentinels to get like rare. But I mean, hey, crazier things have happened.
Exactly. Anyways, back on the PlayStation Vita, it was also able to play digital PS1 and PSP games. Did you ever use it for that at all, or did you mostly just play native?
Totally. Fun thing to remember, it didn't launch with PS1 support. It launched with PSP support.
Right.
But PlayStation 1 Classic support didn't happen until a year after the system had already been out.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, they even, it wasn't all of them for some dumb reason. They had to go and whitelist them unless you were using a PS3 or stuff like that. So it led to really weird things like Crash Bandicoot, you can play it on your PSP in America, but not on your Vita. But you can play Crash Bandicoot and Spyro if you have a European version. It was just really, really dumb. But for the most part, thankfully, I had a PS3, so I got all the stuff I wanted on my Vita. So right now, the stuff I have downloaded all the time, I have I used to have Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, but just because like those versions I can play them on like my PS4 and get trophies, I don't really need it, and those games are pretty beefy. I have all the Oddworld games, so I have Oddworld's Abe's Odyssey, Abe's Exodus. I have Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3. Those are awesome on the system. And Metal Gear Solid 1, I had to bring over through my PS3, but you can get the VR missions through the Vita store. So like Metal Gear plays great on there, especially because like with the Metal Gear HD collection, just like having those first 3 games is just like playing on like the Vita version of HD collection. Like that's like I'm super biased, but I think the MGS HD collection stands like hands down the best HD collection they ever did on the system.
I actually was about to buy that the other day. I think I saw it in store for $30 at my local game store.
There was a time where that game was like over 50, so 30 is a pretty good price for it.
And also, PS Vita is pretty much a Persona machine. It can play, if a lot of people don't know this, but you can download the PSP version of Persona 1, which has a better soundtrack, David. You could play Persona 2, Innocence and Eternal Punishment on there as well. Eternal Punishment being the PS1 port. You can buy P3P for the PSP digitally, play that on your Vita as well. And, of course, Persona 4 Golden, Persona 4 Dancing All Night, and Persona 3 and 5 Dancing. So, it's really impressive how many Persona games are actually on the system. To me, at least.
So, like, I've been wanting to do a video for this, but I've been just stuck in Persona 5 Strikers review hell for, like, the last month. But
good video, by the way. Great video, by the way.
Thank you. I would like to do this hopefully next weekend if I have the chance. I want to talk about what people aren't really discussing of, like, people are saying, like, in the kind of panic of the stores closing, oh, I gotta go get Nocturne, I gotta go get DDS or the Raito games and blah blah blah. But people aren't talking about the kind of elephant in the room that is Persona 3 and 5 Dancing on Vita. That never got a physical release in English.
Right.
Those games are digital only, and after this summer, if you haven't bought them, which a lot of people haven't, like, those versions of the English copies will be gone forever, which is really sad.
Oh yeah, even though the quality of the games is questionable, it's really sad because I have my Japanese copies over here, of course.
Yeah, but like, just think, like, if you want to go out of your way and like see what the English version of like those cases were, it's just going to be lost to history, at least in terms of legal options. And I think like another reason I want to do that video is just because I'll always have such a big chip on my shoulder that Atlus West could have printed it physically. Fans wanted them to print that game physically, and they just decided to save some money, which in the long run is going to really bite them in the butt.
Right. Well, how much money would they have actually made off of those Vita releases, though? I feel like it would have to be limited.
But then think about it. The very first ever limited print run of a like Vita game, on the top of it being Persona, it would have sold out no matter what they did. Like, it is like if they had like had all of the fans worried scalpers were going to get it, I legitimately think they could have done 10,000 copies of both and sold them out.
Right. I mean, of course it would have sold, but I'm sure they would have had to done like a limited run of it or something along those lines.
Well, the problem is they just didn't want to pitch it to retailers, because they thought basically by 2018 of E3 is when we found out the Vita physical cards were ending. And then they basically took that as, oh, sorry guys, it's ending, we can't do it anymore, when you really could have, literally until like the last minute. And so what that kind of meant was like, okay, they could have done it if they wanted to, they just chose to do the cheaper option of, like, because think about it, if they sold it through a limited like kind of quantity measure, they can't do retail. If they're not doing retail, they'd have to do online. Sega has notoriously, which is really, really funny, of like, Sega will whore out their IP to anyone. Do you want fucking Jet Set Radio? Do you want Streets of Rage? Do you want fucking Alex Kidd? We'll give it to you. You have the license. We're never going to make any of these fucking games ever again. Go for it. But they will never let you sell their games that they made. And that's how you like notice of like Sega has never worked with any of these companies for a smaller print of anything, whether it be something big like Yakuza or something small like Tembo the Badass Elephant. Like, they just are really, really stringent Japanese-minded company. Like, no, these are our games. We are making 100% of the profits or no profit at all. So for that to have happened, they would have had to use their bullshit store that they never wanted to use. And since they don't like using their own ATLUS store, they were like, well, no, let's just never do it. Because, like, think about it. It also would have been a win-win for the ATLUS store, which everyone ignored until it died. Because, like, the ATLUS store was either, okay, it had some cool merch, but it was usually Anime Expo leftovers and had way too much expensive shipping. It was stuff that it was easy for you to ignore. If they had an exclusive version of a Persona game that you were never going to get otherwise, it would have sold like crazy.
Oh, no doubt about that. I mean, I'm not saying that it wouldn't sell. I'm just saying, would it be like very profitable for them?
I mean, because like think about it. As soon as you're doing it yourself, you're cutting out GameStop's money. True. You're cutting out like transportation. Like all you are doing is paying Timmy in the shipping room to package these things for a week and ship them off. Like they would undoubtedly would have made like if companies like Limited Run Games can go from a 2-person company to a 40-person company, I guarantee they would have like made enough money running like even a 5,000 copy per game run.
Right. It's really, like you said, it's really sad that never got an English physical release. But speaking of games that have gotten English physical releases, though, we're an hour into this podcast, and I'm just getting to the launch titles of the Vita. So I'm just going to rapid fire mention some of them. It had 25 launch games in North America, and that include the 4 biggest ones were Uncharted Golden Abyss, Wipeout 2048, FIFA 12, and Rayman Origins. What do you think of the launch titles for the Vita itself? I think it...
I'm personally offended by what you picked, sir. I'm so offended that I'm even going to rapid fire you and just give you... feel free to interrupt me if you have any opinions on any of these. Because I'm going to say shout-outs to the real ones that deserve a shout-out. Escape Plan. Digital only, super fucking fun puzzle game. Hot Shots Golf. Looks amazing. Still amazing. Really, really fun. Mod Nation Racers. Probably the worst Mod Nation Racers, but hey, that's a series absolutely no one ever remembers.
That was fun, though. It was fun.
Super Stardust Delta, amazing, looks amazing, and is just another one of those cases of please, people, for the love of God, please play How Smart games. If you have a PS5, please buy Returnal this month. Next up, Uncharted Golden Abyss. It's Uncharted. It's fucking great. It's got too many gimmicky features, but it's awesome. Wipeout 2048. Looks amazing, runs amazing, has a stupid amount of content, especially because you could transfer over Wipeout HD and Wipeout HD Fury. The entire campaign of both games for PS3 was DLC for this one. Ben 10 Galactic Racing, not a great game, but it does have Yuri Lowenthal, so that's why I bought it. BlazBlue Continuum Shift 2 Extend, amazing. It looks like all the BlazBlue games, like Arc System Works games, are amazing. And like I always remember their work looking so good on the Vita that I was like, oh god, why did Persona 4 Arena never come out on Vita? Would have looked so great. Dynasty Warriors next. I've actually been replaying that recently. Such a weird Dynasty Warriors game because it is an exclusive Dynasty Warriors game made just for the system with so many gimmicks. It is just really weird. Luminous Electronic Symphony. Okay, awesome game. So many things I could say about this. Weird thing of like, it's not expensive, but it is delisted, so finding it digitally is now impossible. But thankfully, Ubisoft published it and made a bajillion copies. But Electronic Symphony is so good. And fun fact about Electronic Symphony, it originally started life as a Luminous Daft Punk game. The people behind Luminous went to Daft Punk, pitched them the game, and they said, hey, how would you guys want to make all the songs for this game and basically just treat this as its own album? The only reason they turned it down is because they were too busy making the soundtrack for Tron Legacy. So I'm like, okay, that hurts that it didn't happen, especially now that the band is broken up, but hey, that's a good excuse, and the soundtrack of Electronic Symphony still really fucking good. Speaking of weird music games, I know this is an awkward recommendation. Trust me when I say this, Michael Jackson The Experience on PS Vita is the best version of that game and is a legitimately fun music game. It is dirt cheap, it's delisted, and it is got a really, really small track list, but is really, really fun and has some weird CG Michael Jackson cutscenes. Plants vs. Zombies, it's just Plants vs. Zombies. It's really fucking good. Rayman Origins, one of the best versions of like one of the best series that like never gets talked about anywhere. Touch My Katamari, it's like the last original Katamari game out there, so like how do you not love that? Tales from Space Mutant Blob Attacks, one of the earliest games by Drinkbox, the Severed team and Guacamelee team. So much fun, such a good platformer, and by some miracle actually got a physical release. Ultimate Marvelous Capcom 3, so much fun. It's like the best running version. It was portable, looked amazing, had all these exclusive features, but like sadly then got delisted and then never put back again. But like, oh my god, I love Ultimate Marvelous Capcom 3. And finally, Virtual Tennis 4 World Tour Edition, the last Virtual Tennis Sega ever made, and it was on the Vita. It is so good, and oh my god, it got really expensive if you want an English American copy. I don't know why. God, I love tennis. It's really fun. What a fucking launch lineup. There you go. That's the whole launch lineup.
Spencer, if this SMT Network thing doesn't work out in the future, you could always start a Vita channel with your encyclopedic knowledge and that brain of yours right there. I don't know how you store all that Vita information in there, man.
I don't either, but I did have a PlayStation Vita podcast for a hot minute, but the trouble is then finding someone who can be around this for more than once on a weekly basis.
Which is understandable to some extent. Yeah, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. The 25 launch games and me only listing 4 of them. So, thanks, Spencer.
I only had to jump on your throat because like I just love so many of those games on there. Like obviously I ignored stuff like Reality Fighters or FIFA or F1 2011, but like there were just so many games that were like legitimately good standouts to me. I'm just like I just have such a hard time. Like even when I totally ignored Army Corps of Hell, it was a Square Enix game. It's literally Pikmin in hell, but you're Satan.
Right.
It's just like such a crazy game.
Anyways, let's talk about sales for the Vita and its games right quick. The sales were strong for the Vita at first, especially in Japan and the US, but they kind of stalled after a while. In the US, it sold 200,000 units in its first month, but sunk down to around 50,000 a month after that. Kind of sad. You kind of see where this is going for the system. Despite weak sales, it got a lot of high-profile games in its first year. Gravity Rush released Little Big Planet, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, Persona 4 Golden, Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, and Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, all released on the system the first year of its birth. So
it was a busy year.
Yeah. So I think all in all, pretty successful lineup for their first year. If I think we would both agree on that, correct?
It's weird. The first year has a lot of really high highs, but then also we have to remind ourselves that it had like one of the worst Resistance games of all time release, and also had like a very forgettable Call of Duty, which I'm playing through actually Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified now for the first time. It's not as bad as everyone says, but it definitely doesn't feel like a Black Ops game, and you can definitely tell it was a game. Like, literally, Black Ops Declassified was made in less than 6 months, right? And it super shows.
And it was totally a rush project, and it was definitely on the back burner. They just released it probably because they had a contractual obligation to do it. Which gets me, because there were so many Vita games that we were promised at first. If I remember correctly, I remember watching E3 one year, and there was supposed to be a BioShock Vita game at one point, and they just kind of dropped that.
Do you remember Ken Levine later in life kind of explained what happened to that project? Did you ever look up and see what happened to it and like what kind of game it was going to be?
I did not whatsoever. No.
So it was going to be published by Sony, but Ken Levine was going to work on it in a creative design effort, but not really like super in charge of it. It was going to be a Final Fantasy Tactics-like game in the world of Columbia from BioShock Infinite before the revolution, and you could kind of pick which side you wanted to be on in terms of like with the slaves or the people in charge of Columbia, and it was just sort of picking your choices, seeing what would happen, and all these things like that. And literally the only reason it never happened was because 2K got too busy to basically find a developer to make it.
That's really sad, too. It sounds really cool.
The idea was there. It sounded solid. Ken Levine was excited for it. And it like sounds fucking great, and it just never happened because people got too busy.
That's a damn shame, too. Especially since like games like these Call of Duty games and stuff that released for the system itself weren't that good. I know people liked Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation for the most part, but I know the reception to the Black Ops game was, even though it still has like one of the most dedicated lobbies out there like for the Vita itself. There's still quite a few people playing Black Ops Declassified, from my knowledge.
I literally hopped into a lobby last week, and it was full immediately.
Yeah.
It's crazy. People are still playing.
Yeah, that really boggles my mind that mid-tier Call of Duty game on the Vita is still getting attention to this day in lobbies. Anyways, it was a pretty good release in 2012 for games. For the Vita. In 2013, unfortunately, because of sales of the Vita and everything, third parties started dropping support for the system, and Sony switched to a focus on indie gaming for the Vita. Do you think this was a smart move by them? Why do you think they ultimately did this? Do you think the third party support was dropped because of the dwindling sales for the Vita?
So, third party sales were a weird one. Of like, there were definitely games that sold well and well above expectations. Like looking at things like ATLUS did not think Golden was going to be big. Like, they were like, oh, it's a cool project, but like literally, I remember talking to people at ATLUS before both games launched. They were like, oh yeah, Arena's going to be our big seller this year. Like, Golden's going to be cool, but like Arena's going to be the hot shit. And it's just so funny of like, I thought they were going to be hot shit, never really blew up the way they thought they would, and then the Vita became known for all these games that you wouldn't necessarily think, oh yeah, like this is like a really, really big deal. Like, for everything, but like what made it tough is then like third parties had a hard time pinning down what was going to be successful in the Vita. Sony was putting a lot of money into first party titles, but wasn't always kind of seeing like that immediate return. Especially, Sony never really had a worldwide first party hit. Like, you can look at things like Gravity Rush was popular, but never really like took the world by storm on any platform it released on. Something like Soul Sacrifice was really big in Asia, like Freedom Wars, but never really blew up as big in the West. But then you can look at something like Freedom Wars, and actually Freedom Wars did much better in the West than it did in Japan. And it was just such a hard system to kind of like nail until that focus on indies. And what was funny is that focus on indies didn't come out of a lack of third-party titles. That was actually a initiative Sony had started during the late PS3 era. So before the Vita had even been out, Sony had a big focus on exclusive titles and paying indies to come to their systems. And they had this thing called Pub Fund. Pub Fund was basically, you pitch a game to Sony, Sony funds it all themselves, and once they have made their money back, you get all the money, no sweat. It was basically like what you would get when games were signing themselves to the Epic Game Store. And they pay all the money up front. You don't got to worry about anything. You just got to put it on their platform for a certain number of months, and then you're all good. And that's how you saw games like Dragon Fantasy. That's where Guacamelee came from. And all of these really unique, interesting digital titles kind of came out that way. And that's why you then started seeing more devs come there, even if it wasn't exclusive. Like, you saw Hotline Miami release on PS3 and Vita first on consoles, not because, oh, that's where the largest install base is, but that's because that's where indie games were going. Indie games weren't going to where the masses were. The masses were following like where the indie games were being played. And that's why it was just one of those funny things of, like, I had to explain to someone recently of like, why is Hotline Miami so associated with the Vita? And it's like,
let's not forget, it was also Hotline Miami on the Vita was on The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, and it's like, that's not like for lack of any like specific reason. It was like, no, it was like, it was just one of those things that if you had a Vita, like, you probably had Hotline Miami. Like, Hotline Miami on Vita was so big, there was even a physical release by Spike Chunsoft in Japan. It was the first like physical release of that series for many years in the West. And it was just like one of those crazy things of like, it was just super portable, super fun. The battery life was great, like just enough to like play these games. Porting to them was pretty easy, especially back in the early days, whether you were using something like Game Maker or earlier versions of Unity, or maybe even your custom engines. And that even, like, I would say the indie game boom on Vita never really died, but I would say its last probably big, oh my god, indie game release was the year Stardew Valley and Undertale came out. I remember, I'll never forget, the year Undertale got announced at E3. I literally stood up in theaters because I was at like one of those like watch E3 in theaters experiences.
Yep.
I was the only guy there cheering for it because it was Undertale, and B, it was coming to the Vita physically. And I was like screaming my head off, and I was like, this is like the most peak Vita moment I will ever have in my freaking life. And it was just so funny of like, yeah, it's a game, like, because if you look at something like Undertale, of course it could run on the Vita. Even like Deltarune could run on the Vita. But it was just one of those things of devs knew where to go. The fan bases were there. Things like PlayStation Plus really, really helped. They were very aggressive with PlayStation Plus. That started in the fall of 2012. And I'll never forget that first launch lineup of PlayStation Plus. It was Jet Set Radio, Uncharted Golden Abyss, Gravity Rush, and 2 other games I'm totally forgetting and being a bad fan of. But it was like all of these big games that had literally just come out that year, and they were like committing to monthly exclusives all the time. So Sony just at that time, they were hungry. They knew that they needed to really show fans that they were committed to this system, and if they couldn't with games, they were going to with indie games or PlayStation Plus titles, and they really did at the time. Like, they did a great job for many, many years, because even if Sony wasn't doing first-party stuff, for many years, Sony put money into games that people probably didn't even know about. The only reason the Telltale games came to PlayStation Vita was because Sony paid for them all. They published them, and they paid for the porting.
And I think another big reason why the Vita was kept afloat for a while was because you had such great Japanese developer support. The Atelier series, Danganronpa, even Persona and Final Fantasy X and X2 came to the Vita as well. So you had a very solid lineup of games. It's just the fact of Sony not marketing the Vita the way it should have been. Would you say that that's correct right there? Would you agree with that?
And it was always a system kind of trapped between marketplaces of, in the West, they loved it for downloadable titles and indie things like that. So obviously physical releases weren't necessarily as big of a priority. In Japan, they were loved by all these Japanese developers putting out these visual novels, RPGs, and these massive experiences. And it was hard to kind of have that universal success in both regions without kind of pissing off one or the other.
Right. So, a revision of the console actually came in 2013. We talked about the 1000 model earlier. This is the 2000 model. It was 20% thinner, 15% lighter, and also, unlike the 1000 model, had 1 gig of internal storage and an extra hour of battery life. The only thing is that they ditched the OLED screen for an LCD screen. So, obviously, we probably both prefer the 1000 model. Did you think this was a good upgrade for the... Like, if people were wanting to go out and buy a Vita, do you think this would be the better deal because of that hour battery life or anything? Or would you prefer having the 1000 model still to this day? And one thing I did not mention was the fact that it could also hook up to a micro USB cable now because they had their own proprietary cable for the 1000 model. I know 2000 model was a micro USB.
I think both definitely have their place in it. As someone who owns both, I love both for different reasons. It's nice having that internal memory. The lighter feel doesn't really feel cheap. They both all feel solid. It's definitely just... It's one of those nice things of, if you are stuck with only getting one or the other, I wouldn't say, oh, you really should hold out for the other if you can. For every pro I can give the 1000 or 2000, there are just as many cons as they can kind of take or get from each other.
Right. But we both prefer the 1000. At least I do. I love that 1000, screen.
I appreciate the heft. I love the OLED screen, and it's just one of those things of even because of how many hours I've put into the 1000. Whenever I go to my 2000, I'm like, oh god, where did half of it go?
Right. So in 2014, Sony kind of shifted focus again for the Vita. There was less first-party games, and it was basically marketed as a companion device for the PS4. It could do remote play for the PS4, even though I've had nothing but bad experiences with that. And you could also, if I'm not mistaken, you could do downloads and stuff on your, or maybe that was the PS3 where you could do downloads for it and put it on your Vita. But what did you think about them shifting this? This shift in focus to a companion for the PS4 rather than its own thing?
I actually was really a big fan of it. For whatever reason, even though I've never had great internet no matter where I live, I've had nothing but great luck with the Vita. I've played through dozens of PS4 games almost primarily through the Vita. I experienced almost all of 13 Sentinels through remote play. It was great for things like A Realm Reborn. Playing Final Fantasy 14 was a blast. Just fun for like checking in on games, like even if I could only play for a little bit, or like collecting stuff, whether it be in like Infamous or whatever. So it was one of those things I really, really loved, and even to the point of like I stopped using remote play only when I got my PS5, just because I can't use my Vita anymore for it. So like I even was using it all the way up until last year. Like I mentioned, besides stuff like 13 Sentinels, like I even played Strikers with remote play. I played Royal with remote play. I played all of Vanilla with remote play.
And may I just say, Royal on remote play, it's absolutely amazing. I loved every second of it. When it did work for me, when the remote play did work for me, it was phenomenal. I loved playing Royal, especially during quarantine, where I would, go different places of the house, go outside a little bit, play it on remote play, and it even looked stunning on my OLED screen. But it was a great way to experience the game.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, let's see here. My next point was that Sony was relatively quiet about the Vita after 2014. Third-party games were still coming out, but the Vita fell in popularity because of lack of marketing. But a weird thing that happened in 2014 here in the US, at least, the PlayStation TV, I wouldn't say it's a new console. It was definitely a new console by Sony, but it's not like new. The PlayStation TV came out November 14th, 2013 in Japan, and in North America almost a year after on October 14th, 2014. So what the PlayStation TV was, it was a console that you could hook up to your TV via HDMI. It had a Vita user interface. It had the Vita operating system. It could play most Vita games, but not all of them. So it was a really weird release, and by the time that it died in popularity, you could find them for $20-$30 clearance at Target. You could play it with your PS3 and PS4 controllers. You could also do remote play with it with your PS3 and PS4. Spencer, do you have a PlayStation TV? Do you have a lot of experience with it?
So I have a lot of experience with it. I've used it a lot in my time, but what's really funny with the PlayStation TV is I never wanted it, and I still don't really, even now knowing like how rare they are. And one of the reasons behind that is just like I even like aware of its limitations. What's so funny about everything is what I love the most really about the Vita is the fact that like I can take that portably. This is not an experience I want to kind of be able to play with it like the Switch, where it moves from the TV to my bedroom and blah blah blah. Like I enjoy games where they're cross buy or cross save and whatnot, but at the same point it's like it's cool for the people out there who only want to play games at home on their TV. But I think removing the portable aspect of it and removing it from that system and like playing like a touchscreen feature with that touchscreen, having like that specific size, it just kind of removes what really made it special for me. So I'm glad it exists for people out there who either want to hack it or play with it like that for it. But it was just always like it was like just like out of my wheelhouse enough for me. Like I'm very aware of it. It's like all the flaws also it had definitely didn't do a good job on kind of making me want to have one. Transferring like your accounts from one to another not always being the most easy. There were just so many like little caveats to it. I never felt like even to this day like not having a Vita was me missing out.
So would you consider it basically a failure here in the West?
I wouldn't say it's I mean, it failed everywhere in terms of like sales. So yeah, it's like in terms of a financial failure, yes. In terms of what like should have happened with it, they should have had it be every game playable on the Vita can play on that, whether it was a good experience or not. They shouldn't have had things whitelisted. They should have had a different PlayStation Store, because even though it looks the same as the Vita, they are two different PlayStation stores. If a game does not run on the Vita, you can't even try to download it from the Vita Store on the Vita TV. So many just stupid little like caveats and whatnot with it. So
it was just odd because the Vita was selling poorly to me in the US, and then they released. I wonder if they thought it was like going to be its saving grace or something. Like if they thought that it was actually going to do well, because it was such such a late release.
There was very very little hope with it. Like honestly, the most that they were really selling it on was just saying stuff like, "Oh hey, what was it?" Like the most they were selling it on was, "Oh, it can also be a remote play app for your PS4." Like that was really it.
Right. It's a cool idea in theory. I don't think it was executed as well it could have been, but I can tell you this. I got my PlayStation TV February of last year, and that is how I experienced Persona 4 Golden, and I wouldn't have changed that for the world.
Yeah, and I mean, I know so many people who like enjoy their like TV like so much for it. So it's like I'm glad it exists for like those people out there who enjoy it. Like I would never kind of be like, oh well, it never should have happened.
Well, up until then, that was the only way to experience Persona 4 Golden on the Vita or the PlayStation TV. We did have the Steam port back then until a few months later, of course. But I wouldn't have changed that for the world. It didn't look the best on the TV, but I pretty much kept my expectations in check, and that's how I experienced the game. So I'm grateful that it exists, but I wouldn't consider it a success at all. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the history of the Vita as far as I've got. Right now what I want to do is shift our focus right quick to ATLUS released Vita games. I'm going to list some of them right quick. Spencer, if you have anything to say about them or anything, just let me know. Obviously, there's going to be some ones in there that obviously we've talked about numerous times. You don't have to speak on them. But if you have any special memories or anything about the games you want to share, just let me know. We're going to go.
I gotta give an immediate shout out to one that is not on here, but was the actually first Vita game on the PlayStation Store, at least as long as I have my timelines correct. The first ATLUS published Vita game was Rollers of the Realm.
Oh.
Rollers of the Realm was one of those Western published ATLUS indie games. It is literally pinball, but as a RPG.
So weird thing.
On PlayStation 3 and Vita.
Weird thing. I actually have it on my list. I sent you the list that I actually made a list after I sent this one to you. And,
okay.
It's actually there in my 20.
I see Rollers of the Realm.
Yeah.
See, this is what I get for assuming the worst of you now.
Oh man, shut up.
That's my bad.
I have it as a 2015 release. I could be wrong though.
I'm pulling this up now just because like I feel like it wasn't that late, but I'm also probably like horrifyingly wrong.
I'm also going by Wikipedia.
Weird ones of like, a what?
I'm also going by Wikipedia, so it could totally be wrong. It didn't even have an article when I pulled up the list of ATLUS release games. It didn't even have like its own page for this game.
Yeah, it's pretty much scrubbed. You can still buy it actually through them and whatnot. The only other one that I don't see on here for real this time is they also published under ATLUS on the Vita was the downloadable title and is 100% just Mother. Well, a version of Mother. Was Citizens of Earth, which is you as a politician collecting citizens for your political campaign, but it plays out as a Mother-style RPG.
Right. So let's go. Let me go ahead and list these while you look up whatever you need to look up right quick. I'm going.
No, those are the only two weird ones. ATLUS didn't do a lot of digital-only games on Vita.
Gotcha.
So Rollers of the Realm and Citizens of Earth are literally like the only two weird ones. Everything else got a physical release.
Gotcha. So weird too.
Besides Persona.
Well, I think they were out of this phase during the Vita where they just like publish a bunch of weird games. Like I was listening to some of the games yesterday during my PS3 podcast, and I think everyone was pretty much surprised when I said there was a Sherlock Holmes game that was published by ATLUS. It was such a weird time for them, but I think they kind of got that out.
I haven't listened to it, but I'm going to tell you this right now. If you didn't bring up Game of Thrones published by ATLUS...
I did. Don't worry.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Don't worry. It's there.
That's when I love that like everyone forgets.
I actually remember seeing that game at a GameStop years ago. I went in with my friends. I never really watched Game of Thrones, but I saw that on the shelf. I had no idea that was an ATLUS game whatsoever.
So what's really funny about that one was literally it's not even based off the show. It just released at the end of season 1. So it released at like the best timing, but it was such a dense RPG in the sense of like it did not hit at all. Like they thought it was going to be huge. But the funny thing about it is it's actually really unique because it's the only game based off the book. It's not based off the shows, it's based off the original novels.
Gotcha. So let me go ahead and list off these games. Persona 4 Golden was released for the Vita on June 14th, 2012. Dragon's Crown was released on July 25th, 2013. And like I said, stop me if you have anything to say about any of these games that I list off. And these are the main Atlus games, by the way. These are the ones that they developed. Persona 4 Dancing All Night, June 25th, 2015. Odin Sphere was released on January 14th, 2016. Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight, Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight, May 24th, 2018. Catherine Full Body, February 14th, 2019, which unfortunately the West didn't get a release of on the Vita, which is sad. Pretty good, pretty strong list of games that were actually developed by Atlus and everything. At least in my opinion. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think it was great. I mean, obviously, it's halfway kind of split with Vanillaware and whatnot on there, but yeah, in terms of like Atlus Japan's publishing stuff on it was a lot, probably smaller than people would expect for it, but they supported that system literally from beginning to end in terms of what they thought was financially viable, even all the way up until games that got canceled. People never thought, games that either got canceled that people knew about or only had heard rumblings of, such as 13 Sentinels was going to happen but got canceled. Persona 5 Royal was going to happen but then got canceled. And it sucks that Catherine Full Body was our last game and we never got it officially in the West on Vita. But at the very least, that port is so good and of such a high quality. Like, I think it does such numbers not only for like showing how good of a developer Atlus always was for that system, and just kind of continue to be like, technically they are one of those like systems, like technically Atlus is, if not probably like number one developer for the system, just in terms of technical aspects of like their games never needed to be overclocked. You could always access everything from the menu. Like they weren't pushing the Vita to its limits, but they were still making the games look and run so good.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's no doubt. And it really gets me that, was there I know we've talked about the port for Persona 5 Royal to Vita before. Was there ever a Vita port of Persona 5 in the making, or what were they just talking about that for Royal, if you don't mind me asking?
No, but the reason it was never in the cards was because even internally at Atlus, they kind of knew that they were going to do Royal even before Vanilla had been out.
Right.
And in their heads, they were like, if it was up to Atlus, they would have just only made it a PS4 game, but because they'd already announced it, it was like, okay, whatever, we'll do it. Like, Atlus sold, like, nothing of the PS3 copies. Like, it was a couple thousand, but nothing really to sneeze at. So they were like, okay, well, we'll just make the Vita version the expanded upon version, because why not? And the reason why was just because like it had already taken so long to come out. They needed so much time just for the base edition to come out. Technically, 1000% could have happened. Like, there's nothing stopping Persona 5 Vanilla or even Royal running on the Vita. It just would have been a situation of, okay, do we have time to optimize these versions and still hit our initial release date? Because one of the things you always got to remember is how many times that game got delayed. And I think if it hadn't been a situation of we got to get this game out the fucking door, it would have happened at least twice.
Right. And by the way, you just mentioned something. Persona 5 could totally run on Vita. It could also totally run on Switch. Don't let anyone, if you're listening to this, don't let anyone tell you any differently. The people who think that it can't run on Switch are smoking crack. I'm just putting that out there right now. It could totally run on Vita. So, also other games that were just published by Atlus, USA Atlus West. Wasn't developed by them, but they were published over here in the West from it. 2013, we had Conception 2, Children of the Seven Stars. You know how...
Your favorite.
Yeah.
I think you said it was your game of the year.
Bro, stop. There's a reason why I won't play.
That's the difference between Atlus USA and Atlus West. Atlus West would never publish Conception 2.
Right. Man, it's like, it's so weird. I don't watch Game of Thrones for the same reason that I will not play Conception 1. It's just too weird for me, man. If anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to mention it here on the show, but if you look at Conception 1 and its premise...
it's in the name!
It's not called Incestion! It's not Incestion! It's not called Incestion, dude. Bro, it's...
My copy looks a little different than yours, then.
2014, Lost Dimension was released. 2015, Rulers of the Realm, and Dungeon Travelers 2, The Royal Library, and The Monster Seal. And in 2017, there were three titles released, and you might have to help me with the pronunciation of the last two.
Oh, I'm so ready for you to say this.
Oh man, I'm kind of embarrassed. You had the Caligula effect, of course. I don't even want to know if I want to try to pronounce it. Utah Romeo? I don't even know. I'm so southern that. How do you pronounce it?
It is called Utawari Ramono. So yeah, Utawari Ramono. They released first Mask of Truth, and then I did get it right the first time. Mask of Deception released first. That is the second in the trilogy, and then Mask of Truth, which is the final part in the trilogy. Yes, that means Atlus released 2 and 3 out of a trilogy and never released the first one.
Well, that's kind of not surprising considering we only got Eternal Punishment over here in the West at first instead of...
Well, they had at least a little bit of a leeway in terms of why. The reason is Utawari Ramono is a very, very famous visual novel series that's really unique because it is a almost burping on that one. It is a visual novel that has implemented strategy role-playing game elements. So it is a super deep, super long, super text-heavy visual novel that started way back when as actually an eroge game with some like partial like nudity and whatnot and like sex scenes. And it was a PC game, PS2 port, PSP port, very, very different looking than Mask of Truth and Mask of Deception. But what happened was those follow-ups were so successful in that new visual style that actually they went back and remade it in the style of those two games. So if you look at Mask of Prelude, so it goes, the first game is Prelude to the Fallen, which was released last, then Mask of Deception, and then Mask of Truth. It was basically, they remade the first one in the most current engine and added a bunch of new quality of life features, voice acting, new musical arrangements. That just came out last year by NIS America, and it actually came out digitally and physically on PS4, but the fact that NIS actually made the Vita version in 2020 was amazing, because God knows they made no money from that port. But I just thought it was really, really cool that it's this very, very prolific visual novel series. I thought it was really crazy at the time that 2017 Atlus not only was localizing it and publishing it, because Utawari Ramono was their last big effort at Atlus before they did the full 100% merger. And Utawari Ramono, those last games were the last time that they published games that were not either made by Sega or by Atlus. So I'm glad they started it. I'm glad that they made physical copies exist. I really, really like that series. I really, really want to talk about it more. But the sad thing about it is it's like they started it, kind of like with Caligula Effect, they just kind of put them out to die. And I'm glad that those fandoms are still living on in their own way. But I seriously, I never hear anyone talk about Utawari Ramono. Like, the people are often surprised that those games are even Atlus games.
Right. Well, not really Atlus game, they just published them. That's like saying the 101 Mega Mix, Sports Mix for the Wii.
Count it. It's all canon. They all have Jack Frost in them somewhere, I'm sure.
Honestly, I think it would have sold better if Jack Frost would have been on the cover. Just saying. That would have been nice. But all in all, for Atlus releases on Vita, pretty strong, don't you think? It's not as much as people think, but for the most part, I think pretty strong lineup of games.
Yeah, the only weird one I would say is I thought it was very weird they did Dungeon Travelers 2 and never the sequel. Shout out to Dungeon Travelers 2 sequel, literally being called Dungeon Traveler 2 2. I really enjoy when dumb games and have even dumber sequel titles like Samurai Warriors 4 2 or Final Fantasy X 2.
Right.
But yeah, like their titles were great. I was like Atlus in the Vita era was like firing on all cylinders. Like, I bought everything they had. I enjoyed all the stuff they did, whether it was like 10 out of 10 or like a weird like 7 out of 10. It was always something really unique. And that's what I really, really love about that Atlus era of like, they took risks. They like were willing to do the heavy hitters like Persona, but they were also willing to put out stuff like Conception, which you just don't really see them taking those risks anymore now. So I miss the days, I guess you could say I miss the days where Atlus was cool enough to raw dog, but not anymore.
By the way, it's called Conception, not Incession. So anyone who wants to play the first game, don't. Please. It's really weird.
Well, yeah, that's why you play the second one. The second one's uncensored. The first one's censored. The second one is uncensored.
Let's see. So that pretty much ends the ATLUS segment I wanted to do for the Vita, and we're going to kind of wrap things up here in a second. The Vita was discontinued in North America in March of 2019. The Vita Store closes on August 27th, 2021, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. At the end of the day, Spencer, when you look at the Vita, its history, all the games that released, do you think it was successful, and what do you think the legacy of the Vita is going to be?
I personally, and I know I'm incredibly biased, because it is my favorite system of all time. It's not my favorite handheld. It's not my favorite Sony device. It is all consoles considered through history. It is just my favorite system of all time. And I'm looking at my shelf. I literally have just a shelf of it. It's just all my Vita game cases and stuff. I'm looking at it. I'm just like, I love all of these games I own so much because I'm not a full set collector. I don't buy every game just because it's physical. I buy a game if I want to play it or if it means something to me. And I'm looking at things like the Oddworld games, Persona 4. I'm looking at Lego Star Wars. I'm looking at Dead or Alive Extreme 3. I'm looking at Caligula. I'm looking at the 9,000 Hyperdimension Neptunia games on there. I got invested into so many new series just through this system that for me, calling it anything other than a success would just be such hypocrisy. I've helped a friend I've helped a friend write not one but 3 books on the system. I'm trying to do my own personal projects with the system because of how much it means to me. I've met so many awesome people in the Vita community. The Vita community is so passionate and so awesome. I love seeing people still playing it, still looking for certain titles. I love that it still has titles coming out. This system that is almost a decade old is just so crazy to me that it's been getting support for so long. And like you mentioned, Sony stopped supporting it after 2015. It is a system that has just been pushing along by literally nothing than the developers and the fans who love it. No one at Sony gives half a fuck about this system, but all of these people out there were what was keeping it alive for so long. All of these developers who just enjoy the system, enjoy the fans, want to put their titles out there on as many places as possible. So financially, of course it wasn't a success. In terms of inspiring a community, in terms of building a game library that will always be remembered, I think the way people look at stuff like the Dreamcast or other systems that, sure, they might not have sold the best and may have been financially kind of a disaster, their level of nostalgia I have for this system will never decrease. It'll always be exorbitantly large, and I'll just always have that special moment of whenever I see someone who not only knows what the Vita is, but enjoys the Vita. That makes me just as happy as playing my favorite game on the system.
The Vita was definitely an underrated system for sure. At the end of the day, we think it's successful in the happiness and everything it brings us and how important it is to PlayStation history. What do you think the downfall of it was financially at the end of the day? Did Sony not market it right? What do you think at the end of the day caused the downfall of it not selling as well as it did?
It's multiple things. It's the inability to have other competition for memory. I don't think proprietary memory is a bad thing. I think it was just that it was only made through Sony and only ever got one price drop. I think having more of a unified message worldwide instead of Japan gets a bunch of exclusives that we either never get or get super late, in America mainly gets digital indie games, definitely sent a message that kind of had things sort of split. Because even for me, I've had a Vita since 2012. I wasn't into Vita collecting until 2016. Until it was 2016, I think I might have had less than 30 Vita games. And then over the last, literally 5 years now, it is almost 400.
Before we wrap things up, I just want to get ask you a few more questions. Are you planning on getting any last-minute digital Vita games on the store, or are you pretty much set with what you have right now?
100%. I want to hear what you say. I actually have already went through the store and I like screenshotted everything that I know I need to get. It's actually not as many, just because of how stupidly like amount of like titles I've already bought. But like for you, are there any like last minute ones that you're kind of looking at like, oh god, I gotta get that?
Probably not, since my memory card isn't that big, and I don't want to spend a lot of money on another one. But definitely some games I have my eye out for. Dragon Ball Z, Battle of Z, even though it's not that great of a game. Yeah.
Bro, go to eBay. Go to eBay and look at the price of those physical copies.
I'm sure it's insane.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm sure it's
Yeah,
insane.
God bless Namco Bandai for putting that game physically out in Europe and, well, I guess also Australia and Asia. But yeah, I got a copy of that recently because yeah, that got delisted, so you can't even buy that digitally anymore.
Which is sad.
A lot of the anime games did, like J Stars J Stars got delisted. One Piece, almost all the One Piece games are delisted outside of like Burning Blood. Oh my god, yeah. There are so many like awesome like licensed anime games. I had a weird moment though of like thinking like One Piece got so many like games on Vita, and there's like not a single Naruto game. It was very weird, like because like I feel like there was an era of like so many Naruto games are coming out on main systems, but never anything else. But yeah, my little list right now of like stuff that's digital I need to pick up.
Well, it's weird because there wasn't any Naruto or Yu-Gi-Oh games for the Vita, as far as I'm concerned, right?
Yu-Gi-Oh games had a long break though, like until Legacy of the Duelist came out on consoles very late into their like lifespan. Like there hadn't been a Yu-Gi-Oh game since like the DS or PSP with like Tag Force.
By the way, do you have Legacy of the Duelist for Switch?
No, I don't. I don't. But I know, like, I feel like everybody like has that game. That game sells so well.
Man, you need to get it. Kira just got it. And I was just on a live stream the other night. It was so much fun. Man, get it. We gotta duel sometime, man. That'd be a lot of fun.
I love Yu-Gi-Oh, but boy, let me tell you, I've spent an ungodly amount of money playing that in my time.
Me too, man. I'm a boomer, so I only like old support. I get links and everything. I don't understand pendulums whatsoever. I can give two fucks about them.
I was all the way until Xyz. Xyz was, I was very big into that, and actually, if you go to my channel, I have like deck profiles of me like doing like preview events, and like I'm very very into Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal more than probably an adult who had graduated high school should have been.
Did you watch Vrains?
No, I only made it all the way up until Zexal, but like I read and I own manga for Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds and Zexal. I remember making fun of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds for a really really long time, and then it was funny. I found out, oh, the manga is just totally different. The manga of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds is just nothing to do with the show.
Oh, same thing with GX. Same thing with GX.
GX was one I liked the show enough that I didn't mind that, but. So yeah, real quick, like on my highlight list, I have so far of just digital only games I'm gonna cave and eventually buy before the store closes. Way Forward a couple years ago remade A Boy and His Blob.
Mm.
Adventures of Mana, Secret of Mana, Doctor Who: The Eternity Clock, which was actually a Sony paid for a Doctor Who exclusive game that was made by the Until Dawn developers.
Oh.
I'm thinking of getting Dynasty Warriors Godseeker because it's the only Dynasty Warriors game that was ever released in English digital only. I have them all physically, but they're only in Japanese. And that's the Dynasty Warriors that's literally a strategy game. This is a dumb one that I might just have to like make a funding goal. Like I might make a GoFundMe just because this is so dumb, but I would love to like own this just for history. Galagun Double Piece has a game add-on. Remember, this is DLC. Called Pheromone Z. I'll read the description of it. This adds the Pheromone Z item to your Academy store. Upon purchase, you can zoom in and immediately see through clothes on all of the girls.
Oh boy.
So normally it's like, oh, you can see like their underwear if you zoom in really really hard and it focuses. This just immediately lets you see them naked at the slightest zoom. This is $90.
What?
Yeah, it's DLC that's $90.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm saying right now, I would buy that to talk about it, but I don't think there's any way I could justify it unless it was like a crowdfunded effort just to like make something stupid happen.
Oh man, $90 just to see a woman naked. My God. That
I've done more for less, sadly. God Eater Resurrection, I would be interested in getting, because I have God Eater 2 physically, but they never did in English, but they never did a English version physically for the first game remake. But there's a bajillion copies of that for the other one. God Wars had a 1.5 sequel that was just DLC called Labyrinth of the Yomi. Crypt of the Necrodancer, I kept holding out for the longest time. I was like, I'm sure this is going to get a physical one day. Has not, sadly. Hitman Go, Lara Croft Go, Little Big Planet, the DC level premium packs, all of the Muramasa Rebirth DLC, because Muramasa Rebirth is an amazing, amazing game, but people don't really talk about the fact that it got 4 DLC campaigns, and they are all just full-on standalone stories and are amazing, but I've only played like 2 of them. Nightcry, which is a really, really weird game. It is a spiritual successor to the Clock Tower games. It was made by the same team. It was a Kickstarter game. It only came out on PC and was Vita and I think maybe smartphones, and horribly reviewed. But it's just one of those weird things of it is a console exclusive horror game made by the Clock Tower team, and is like all 3D and everything, and I'm like, I gotta buy this. It's just fucking weird. Perils of Baking, literally just because I like the developer Lilimo Games. Shantae Half Genie Hero has some DLC that'd be fun to pick up. Silent Hill Book of Memories, the game that literally everyone forgets is the last Silent Hill game. It's just Diablo is Silent Hill. That also has some DLC that I'd want to pick up just for shits and giggles. Spirit Hunter NG was like a visual novel horror game that is the sequel to Deathmark. Stardew Valley, because I kept holding out for a physical, and I'm pretty sure I'm the last person on Earth who has never played Stardew Valley. SteamWorld Dig 2, another one I was holding out for. XCOM Enemy Unknown Plus was the final one. And those are like my last why have I not bought those, but I'm waiting either for a last minute sale confirmation or for that $90 DLC paycheck bonus.
Also, that stimulus check, because that's going to be a lot. Yeah,
I'm going to need a
stimmy
just for that Galgun DLC.
We're going to need a Vita stimmy for all this, honestly. So, one question, I know this is kind of out of left field. You mentioned Muramasa, and that really left my mind, because I was going to ask you about that at some point. I know they had a Vita port for Muramasa, and it was Rebirth, and it's got a bunch of DLC. Why didn't Atlus publish that in the West? Because I know it's a Vanillaware game, right?
So, initially, in America, it was published by Ignition Entertainment, and the rights to Muramasa are actually held by its publisher, Marvelous. So, Marvelous, in Japan, hadn't necessarily struck up the partnership they now have with Xseed, the Senran Kagura developer. So Axis Games got the publishing rights for the English version, and that's why basically in Japan it's not even published by Atlus there. So Muramasa, from its initial Wii and Vita release, is a Marvelous game just developed by Vanillaware, and then the English version just got put to whatever publisher wanted it, and that's why Axis Games got it.
Gotcha. I didn't know if there was a reason that Atlus didn't get it or anything, because I know they have a good relationship.
This was, back in those kind of late PS2 days, Vanillaware wasn't as tied to Atlus as they are now, which is why you saw stuff like Grim Grimoire was a Nippon Ichi game, so that was NIS. And yeah, they just kind of they were a lot more independent as they are now, pretty much unofficially an Atlus studio.
All right, so the last thing I want to go over before we get this podcast done and out of the way, I want to ask you a random question. Your top 3 video games and 3 underrated games that everyone should play.
Okay, I know you didn't say this, but this just kind of has to be said. I was talking about this with somebody recently on my last podcast. Persona 4 Golden is just the number 1 most overrated game, and I don't say that because I hate it. It's just one of those things of, don't ever feel like you got to recommend Persona 4 Golden. Everybody knows it. No one's going to be surprised that that's a recommendation for you. Right. So you can just push that to whatever corner you want. If you're making a top 10 Vita games, you're wasting a slot on Persona 4 Golden. That's like saying, hey guys, you might want some water.
Right.
It's yeah, I know. I'm going to get water. You've really fucking pinched me on this one. So I need to get 3 games and games I think are underrated.
Yep. Your three personal favorite games and three games that you feel are underrated and everyone should try on the Vita before the store closes.
I feel like that number changes all the time. Do you have yours immediately ready? Because you have way less of a pool to choose from than me.
Right.
I'm having to pick through 900 babies here.
I don't really have any underrated games for the Vita, but my top games, without naming Persona 4 Golden, Persona 4 Dancing All Night is still my favorite Persona game. So I just want to point that out there. That's going to be number one on my list. Danganronpa 2, definitely. Absolutely love that for the Vita. And third's probably Uncharted Golden Abyss. I had a lot of fun with that game. So not really
a great game, man.
Not really a surprising list, but it's games that people should, if you have Vita, you should play. Of course, Persona 4 Golden's up there too. So, but we didn't count that because we already know that was going to be my number one. So.
Okay, so for mine, in no particular order, and I'm sure this list changes a million times anyway. Danganronpa V3, it's my favorite Danganronpa in the whole series. The House in Fata Morgana is easily one of my favorite visual novels of all time, so have to give a shout out to that one. And oh man, these are so many hard answers. Whoa, you're so mean. Oh god, there's a lot. Fuck.
There's a reason I didn't put this on the list. Gotta put you on the spot. And we haven't...
Digimon, probably Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth Hacker's Memory.
I keep on forgetting that's a Vita game.
I really like that game.
I keep on forgetting that's a Vita game, honestly.
So I love those.
And we also haven't mentioned the Zero Escape games are also on Vita if anyone wants to have a really good visual novel to try on their Vita as well.
Whole trilogy on those are really, really good.
And because the physical copy is so expensive now that if you want to play
Zero Escape?
Dude, last time I checked, it was hella expensive.
No way. I mean, maybe on Vita. I was looking at prices maybe on PS4, but yeah, I was looking at Zero Escape. I didn't think those prices had gone up at all.
Maybe I got them mixed up, but that's
what now. While I look though, I'm curious. What are games you think are underrated that more people should be aware of
for the Vita? Well, that's a really good question to ask because
Zero Escape, Virtue's Last Reward. The second is $20.
Okay.
Brand new, a lot of copies there. The Nonary games I see for $90 right now.
Right, that's the one. Yeah.
Nonary games, which really sucks because that's the only way you can play 999. The best version of 999 in my opinion. That being $100 is amazing because I saw that on sale all the time. Okay, now I'm curious if Zero Time Dilemma is still expensive. Well, if it ever got expensive. You can buy it for anywhere from $40 to $100, so I think that's okay, not terrible.
Right.
But wow, yeah, the Notary games being expensive kind of blows my mind.
I thought I saw them for expensive. That's why I kind of went with the PS4 versions digitally because they were on sale for $10. They're always on sale. And unfortunately, the Vita Store doesn't really... The last sale that I saw that them do on the Vita Store was Persona 4 Golden for $8.
Yeah, they're not actually... Sony actually removed the toolkit for devs to put their games on sale on Vita, PS3, or PSP. They haven't been able to do a sale for at least a year and a half, I think.
Yeah, it's a damn shame, too, because everything that you're going to buy, if you're going to make a last-minute run, there's not even a chance of it being on sale, so you're going to be paying a pretty penny. But in some cases, it's better than buy physical.
I know devs are trying to find out if it's too late to put things on sale, but I think, at the very least, it's just one of those ones of, if you got to do it, it could be worse.
Well, easily, I got a $100 gift card the other night for my PS3, redeemed it, and, man, within, 10 minutes, I already spent my money on the ATLUS ports, Persona 4 Arena Ultimax DLC. I'm planning on getting all the P4D DLC for Vita because surprisingly I don't have it yet.
This would be one of those interesting cases of if you have a Costco membership, actually pick those up where you can buy the $100 digital gift cards for $88 or something, because that at least would save you a little bit of money, because like you said, you're going to spend it all.
Right. Because if I don't use them on the PS3,
what are some of your though like underrated games? I'd be curious what you think like never gets enough love.
See, you're gonna hate me for this because I haven't really played a lot of Vita games. I just got my Vita last year, so I don't really have a lot of Vita games. Let me boot it up right quick. See if I have any good games on there. I know for one, I think Root Double's a really cool game. I mean,
Root Double is very fun, and also one of those crazy ones that also shouldn't have had a physical release. It didn't even get a physical release in Japan. It actually was over 4 gigabytes for its digital release, but what happened was, for the physical release, they actually went in and did some extra compromising. Not compromising. They went and did some extra compression techniques to some of the files in it to get it right under 4 gigs. So that like makes that release like extra cool. Really easy one I know no one will ever talk about. I fucking love the port of Disney Infinity on the PlayStation Vita. If you want to talk about like Spencer bait, it is the fact that there is Disney Infinity with the little portal and the characters on the Vita, and it is amazing. Like, you can make open worlds, there are full narratives, it's got so many modes, so many characters. It is just so crazy and so stupid, and I will never forget, like, I was working at GameStop when that got added to, like, because it was a GameStop exclusive in 2015, of like, Disney Infinity on the Vita. And I wasn't into Amiibo. I thought all Toys to Life games were really, really dumb.
right.
And now I'm looking over at my shelf of every single Disney Infinity character, and none of those would have happened if it wasn't for that Vita version. It's so funny of like I got so hooked into it. And that was one of those ones of like, that port was so late to the party. I'm sure it like totally tanked in sales, but just the fact that happened, like, what an insane port. Sony paid Disney to not only make this port exist, but then the crazier part about it all is, like, think about this, is that they had to make a special like little portal that was only for that Vita version.
Right. That's insane. Yeah, that's pretty insane.
The Oddworld games are all on there, like even the more newest ones, like everything but Soulstorm. So New and Tasty is on there. Stranger's Wrath HD is on there. Munch's Odyssey HD is on there. Other ones people don't really talk about much. I mentioned the Neptunia games. Those are really, really fun. I can't recommend those enough.
Yeah, I've been really wanting to get into those. So I kind of like the idle stuff as well. So are the games really expensive physically?
I know a few are getting up there in price, but I don't think like any are like too bad. But yeah, like I'd say, don't be afraid of checking out other genres. Don't be afraid. Check out anything Falcom. Check out the Trails games. Check out Tokyo Xanadu. Check out the Ys games. Like, they are all so much fun. Like there are, like, I could be here all day recommending stuff. It's just like there are too many things to recommend for it.
Also, I know the Attack on Titan craze is big right now because of its final season. Attack on Titan 1 is actually available on the Vita as well. I played that on PS4. And
amazing port. It looks like it's running in potato mode, but it runs just as good as the PS4 version, and that's really saying a lot.
Which shocks me because I got the Switch version of Attack on Titan 2, and it ran like shit. Like, it was embarrassing.
That's one of those funny things of actually the Switch version of Attack on Titan 2 runs better on Vita than the Switch.
And it's a shame because we didn't get Attack on Titan 2 on the Vita in the West.
No, yeah, that was another one of those ones. If it was such a late release, I have that physically next to me, the Japanese one of like, I can't believe they even made that, let alone released it physically in any like territory.
And I think
I'm not gonna complain.
I think I'm gonna be safe in assuming that they didn't do that Final Battle DLC, the Season 3 DLC for the Vita, correct?
No, yeah, that didn't happen, but I mean, the fact that it's there at all is just such a crazy thing for it, but yeah. If Final Battle had released on Vita, that's how I know, like, Koei Tecmo would have been insane. Koei Tecmo made so many Vita games themselves.
Right. So, before we end the podcast, any final thoughts on the Vita, Spencer?
Don't let the store closing scare you out of buying one. I've talked to a few people who were like, oh shit, it's too late now. Like, I shouldn't get the system. Like, even if we're just talking about physical games that are out there, assuming if prices ever kind of go back to normal, which I just saw someone today bought a copy of Persona 4 Golden, just the cartridge for like $90. I like shudder at the thought. But like, assuming prices ever normal out, don't let it like stop, because like those, like the game still has like so many like awesome places to it, and it still has so many crazy exclusives. Like, check it out, do the research. Obviously, I wouldn't blindly recommend it to everybody, but it is one of those things that if you are even remotely interested in it, it is just such a unique system. And like, even with the Switch out there, there's nothing like it.
And it's also cool, also, if you just want it as like a secondary device to play your PS4 on. It's really cool to have remote play on as well. So, Vita, great system, terrible marketing, lots of memories. That's how we could summarize this whole thing up. Spencer, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yeah, anytime, man. And hopefully we can do more shows like this in the future. Thank you, guys. This is pretty much the second part of this double-header episode that I wanted to do. Yesterday we did PS3, today's Vita. It's truly the end of an era with these stores closing, but we can still get these physical games. So act while you can on these things, and just have a good time with them as we are. We'll see you guys later. I'll see you guys on the next episode of the King Games Podcast. King out.
See you guys.